everybody.
Hi, Melissa.
I'm a believer in Jesus Christ who's in recovery and struggles with substance addiction, mental illness, and childhood trauma. My name's Melissa.
Hi, Melissa.
I'm going to begin with the principle for prayer, just changing the last word. Dear God, you know my past, all the good and the bad things that I've done. I ask that you give me the strength and the courage to list these things so that I can come clean and face them and the truth. Please help me reach out to others and that you have placed along my road to recovery. Thank you for providing me the help and keep me balanced as I give my testimony. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. My story began September 15th, 1982 in Denver, Colorado. My mom and dad were not married, and before I turned 1, my mom left my dad after hearing rumors of him being inappropriate with young girls. When she was young, her mother divorced her dad and remarried to a man who was known for this, so she tried early on to protect me. We lived in a small rundown apartment. When I was 1.5 years, she met my stepdad, a neighbor, and they decided to become roommates to afford somewhere nicer. By May 18th, 1985, they were married when I was 2. From an outsider's view, our life was good in our family. What was hidden was the drug and alcohol addiction. My stepdad, Harry, was good to me. He had 3 boys and 2 previous marriages, so I was his only daughter, and I was spoiled. The summer before 1st grade would be the first and only time my biological dad would come to see me during my childhood. At that time, I didn't know he was my dad, just somebody there to play with me and give me piggyback rides. That visit lasted a couple hours and he was gone. Through the years, I would receive a phone call or 2 or a letter from time to time because he was in jail once again. My mom had a bad habit of bad-talking him, but Harry would always stop her and not want me to hear it. I was a weird kid. I lacked social skills from being isolated so often and being an only child. I lied all the time about anything. Harry was always the more caring parent of the 2, which would become very confusing when I was 7 and he started molesting me. At the time, I didn't know it was abuse because I just thought that's the way dads showed their love to their daughters. Imagine my shock and distrust today all indifferent. He would bribe me with money or toys. The neighbor kids always used to think I was so lucky because I always had money but never had to do any chores. My mom worked in downtown Denver and we lived in Thornton. And Harry was a ditch rider for the city of Thornton, so he was always more available in my daily life, being so close. At first, the abuse was something that happened sometimes but was never discussed. After some time, he'd started telling me that it was our secret and not to tell anyone, and if my mom found out, she would kill him, which was probably true because we're Sicilian, we're hot-tempered. When I was about 12, I figured out this wasn't normal behavior for my dad and that it was wrong. I began to hate myself. I felt dirty and disgraced by the things he did to me for years. This is when I began my self-mutilation. He would sneak into my room at night when my mom was asleep, and so I started keeping my room really messy, so when he walked in and in the dark, he would step on things and make noise. And I never had respect for myself. I never truly known my self-worth, and I didn't know how to trust or how to love myself or others. The list goes on for miles when it comes to the trauma he caused me. But for some reason, I never told anyone, because for some reason I can't explain, I still didn't want him to get in trouble. To this day, I don't know why I protected him when he stole my innocence from me. My mom passed away never knowing what her husband did to me. As much as she blamed herself for other mistakes she made in my life, I didn't want her to beat herself up for this one too. I can remember really struggling through my teen years. I went to 2 different high schools in my freshman year, ditching most of the time. The summer before 9th grade, Harry was forced to resign from his job. He worked there for like 15 years. They were investigating him after seeing the company truck in the bar parking lots. Then they followed him to his dealer's house. He cashed in his 401k and we moved out of the city to the mountains. This was the worst thing that they could have ever done to me. I had to move away from our family and my friends. The first day in this small town, I met the local teens, and all they did was party, smoking and drinking, and drug experimentation. I had never done any of these things before. But 2 weeks later, I was smoking cigarettes and weed regularly and either doing drugs or drinking every weekend. My sophomore year, I had the credits of a freshman. After the first quarter, I had ditched more days than I attended, so the counselor gave me an application for Yampa Mountain High, an alternative school where I was responsible for my own curriculum and making my own required 35 hours per week. I was involved with the wrong crowds, staying intoxicated, trying to feel okay inside. I even participated in the process of manufacturing meth, traveling to many stores to purchase the ingredients, and then took part in some of the process and cooking. Thank God I didn't know the whole process. My first acid trip, I was 15. It lasted a week straight. When I would do meth, I'd stay up for at least 2 weeks or more, often hallucinating by then. The first time I tripped was also when I lost my virginity, which was already very casual for me. For once in my life, I could numb my bad feelings I carried inside and pretend to be normal and happy. Proverbs 20:27, the Lord gives us mind and conscience, but we cannot hide from ourselves. I was promiscuous, looking for love through sex, having multiple partners. Even though 90% of the time I was under the influence of something, I surprisingly did very well in school. A few months before my 16th birthday, I officially moved in with my best friend, Brittany, and her mom, since I stayed there every night anyways. Her mom had a good career, so she was always gone working. I finally had a sibling, and I loved it. I saw a side of life for a couple of years, opposite from mine. We went on trips like on a cruise and to Vegas. I had her nice truck to drive when I got my license. I made up my freshman credits and got on track to graduate on time in the class of 2000. My senior year, I had a GPA of 3.75, which was something I was proud of, but it was just below what I needed to get my scholarships for the career of my dreams. I wanted to investigate homicides, till I learned how many years of college that would take. And there was no way I'd be able to pull that off. I had no college funds and my parents barely scraped by, so instead of trying harder like a normal kid from a healthy family would, I did all that I knew how to do with my low self-esteem and no direction. I dropped out of my senior year 2 months before graduation with only one English credit remaining, and I ran off with a drug dealer. It seemed more exciting, and not to mention I thought that was all I was worth, and I couldn't amount to anything more. Within 6 months, I was back at my parents' house, barefoot and pregnant with a Rottweiler. My oldest son's father was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Rudy was born November 21st of 2001. Left to parent on my own like my mother, I did my best, but most of the time it wasn't enough. I suffered so much mental illness, but at this point I didn't realize it, and I still kept my secret to myself. Take it to the grave. I always told myself, I'll bury it, and no one will ever know, and it'll be okay. When my son was 11 months old, I was raped while intoxicated and became pregnant, so now I was carrying 2 secrets. The weight was heavier than you could imagine. I kept to myself, only sharing with one person, my friend Tanya. We shared the same secret. Her biological father molested her as well when she became pregnant at 12. She had the courage to tell, and he was sentenced to prison, and she had an abortion, and before long he was found dead in his cell, suicide. Both of my secrets were safe with her, I thought. She would never betray me. When I could no longer hide my belly, I told my mom. I was heartbroken when she didn't believe me. She said I probably was slutting around and being careless. I knew at that moment I'd never be able to tell her my other secret. My stepdad's reaction was even harder to comprehend. He wanted to kill whoever was responsible. Somehow this situation was wrong, but what he did was different. I had my daughter on September 3rd, 2003, on a rainy autumn day, so I named her Autumn Rain. I placed her up for adoption. She was then named Alexandria Joy, or Lexi for short. This was the hardest decision I ever had to make, but it felt necessary. I was unsure if I'd be able to love a child conceived this way, or would I resent her? Would I see his face every time I looked at her? Plus, I was already struggling to raise Rudy under my parents' roof. 6 months passed, and I attempted suicide for the first time. I've attempted suicide at least a dozen times in many different ways, each time waking up thinking I was such a failure I couldn't even do that right. I was drinking with friends when they mentioned my daughter, and then the judgment followed. I was carrying around so much guilt already. Before I knew it, both my wrists were sliced severely several times, and I didn't even feel the pain. I spent 3 days in a mental hospital. Shortly after, I got a DUI, crashed in my parents' car, and my blood alcohol was 0.39. This was my first day in jail and the beginning of my criminal record. Romans 5:8, when we were still sinners, Christ died for us.
Yes.
I paid all my fines, completed my classes, but didn't do my community service. I have a bad habit of not finishing things. It's a pattern in my life. When my son was 3, I met my two youngest dad. I was working 2 jobs, construction, cleaning, and then I worked a night shift at a gas station. Since I was working 16-hour days, I figured I would reward myself by closing down the bar. I used this as an excuse to help me unwind, so I could go to sleep and be back to work by 4:30 a.m. Rich had just gotten out of prison. He went in at 15 and served 10 years. Where have I heard that before? He was my neighbor where I used to buy my meth. At first, I was so in love. He seemed like such a blessing, but it didn't take long to become toxic. After 4 months, I was pregnant, lost both jobs. I couldn't believe the bad luck I was having, and it really crushed my self-esteem. We rented a small trailer a few blocks from my parents, and Rich got a job where my dad worked. And things were okay for a few months, until he was laid off in the winter due to no work. Then we were evicted from our first rental. I don't remember where Rich was, but I remember packing everything in 2 days with only my mom's help. After getting everything moved, I went into premature labor at 31 weeks. I was hospitalized for a week before Davin J. was born February 9th of 2006, and he weighed 4 pounds, 2 ounces. He spent 7 weeks in the NICU and tested positive for THC, and the hospital blamed that for him being premature. When Davin was 6 months old, my mom was diagnosed with cervical cancer, stage 2B. My birthday of that year, I spent in jail, like many birthdays. This time for not completing my community service. My mom was only 44 and healthy, and we were confident. After her diagnosis, I went to using meth heavily to numb the pain and to be able to care for my kids and to be supportive to her without crying through each day. I needed to hide my fear and be strong for her. Unfortunately, after 6 months of chemo and internal and external radiation, she couldn't bear the pain anymore, so she intentionally overdosed on her morphine. The day she died, March 9th, 2007, I was once again packing and moving after our second eviction. He just quit paying the bills, and he disappeared for days on meth binges. A week before my mom's death, he stole her car in the middle of the night, telling him he needed to go get milk for the baby. A week later, the car was found abandoned at Walmart, and he was arrested 70 miles away after being found passed out in another vehicle. He even stole my mom's jewelry box that was intended for me. I never got a chance to see what was inside. A week after the funeral, I found out I was pregnant again. I quit using meth but still smoked weed. This whole pregnancy was on autopilot. We moved 70 miles away to Grand Junction, and at 27 weeks I started having pain like the previous pregnancy, so I went to the doctor. As a precaution, they gave me a shot to develop his lungs in case he came early, and a good thing, he was born a week later. I went into labor at the top of Grand Mesa. We were camping. Davin and I were trying to take a nap in the tent while Rich was away at another lake fishing with his friend Travis, who we lived with. They returned and we immediately headed down the mountain. The nearest hospital is about an hour and a half away. Travis was driving, and he had epilepsy and prone to seizures in stressful situations. I was very worried. He had a pregnant lady in the back seat screaming through her contractions. Stressful. We made it to St. Mary's, and I knew it was serious when they gave me an epidural. I only had Medicaid, which doesn't pay for this. 15 minutes later, on August 11, 2007, Austin was born 2 pounds, 7 ounces. His skin was still translucent and his legs were the size of my pinky, but by the grace of God, he was breathing on his own. He spent 3 months in the NICU, and I had to find rides twice a day for feedings to bond with him. Before he came home, we were uprooted again. Travis had a seizure in his sleep one night, and he passed away. We went to a cheap motel that was run down. Well, it wasn't cheap, but it was the only option we had. We rented a trailer there for $11.50 a month, and we stayed there for a few months before we found a house. Every place we lived had holes in the walls and broken windows from Rich getting angry. He would abuse the boys and I, and usually when he had no drugs, or he would just disappear. He was also verbally abusive, always told me that nobody would ever love me or respect me, and if I ever left him, I would never see my kids again. He would just tell them I died because they were young enough they wouldn't remember me anyways. I never had a phone. He always took it. We no longer had a car. It broke down. He always had all the money, so I was constantly left to haul groceries in the double stroller with the babies and figure out how I was going to buy diapers. Then the recession hit, and we were being evicted once again. This time we moved to his mom's in a one-bedroom house, and she moved into the garage. I was so miserable at this point, on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Too much stress and trauma in a short time. I just wanted to get sober with him so we could just be a family. He had other plans. One day I said it's either me or the drug, and he chose the drug. The day I left, I had mine and the boys' stuff all packed. Rudy was already at my stepdad's. He started fighting with me, trying to rip the babies out of my arms, and he knocked me to the ground with his hands on my throat, and he said I better let them go or they were going to watch their mom die that day. I held on as long as I could until I started losing consciousness. Then I had no choice but to release them. He called my friend Tanya to pick him up. That was the beginning of their relationship. I left alone, and I went to social services right after to report what happened. That he was under the influence and violent. I was worried about my babies. They did nothing to help. The next couple of years were a drunken blur. My son started acting out, getting in trouble in school while I drowned myself in the bottle. During this time, I became violent. Around age 28, I couldn't keep my secret any longer, so I told a friend who didn't believe me until she asked Harry herself. And his response was, yeah, I messed around with her when she was little, so what? I would often black out and beat him, causing broken ribs and black eyes. Then came the legal trouble for me and losing Rudy to the system, and he was placed in foster care. I knew the family who took him. They had tried in the past to introduce me to God, but I guess I felt too unworthy. I felt I was too far gone and beyond help. I did my best to fulfill the requirements to the courts, and after 7 months, I was able to get an apartment and bring him home. It wasn't long before social services was piling more on my plate than I could handle, and I relapsed again. And once again, Rudy was taken from me. I felt more worthless than ever. My 12-year-old son was disappointed in me and probably felt that he wasn't loved enough for me to do better. I was sick and lost, and I needed God more than I realized. I gave up my apartment. I didn't want to live there alone, and I walked away from everything. I just packed a backpack and got on the bus and went to another town. I quit drinking cold turkey, and that's when my seizures started. After drinking a handle a day, you gotta expect something. I went back to doing meth again, and this is when I started using needles. It's something I said I would never do, but the pain of losing Rudy was just overwhelming. Once again, I needed something to fill that God-shaped hole inside. I was in and out of jail a few more times before I met my now husband, Clay. For the first time, I had someone that wanted to support me and love me. Rudy was finally with his dad at this point. My baby boys were in foster care with family, and I was working with DHS to get them back. I was working so hard, but in the end, they were adopted by their uncle, and once again, I fell apart, taking Clay down with me. He broke his back after falling on ice Christmas Eve during one of my seizures, and after the hospital took him off his meds, I introduced him to meth to help with his pain. Our lives began to fall apart, and soon we were camping in the desert, stuck in our addiction. Before this, though, Clay drove me down to Arkansas to see my biological dad for the last time before he passed. Cancer took him too. We took turns going to jail, mostly me. And finally, one day in late 2019, we decided it was time to pack up and leave Colorado. We didn't have much of a plan, only that we were heading to the Navajo reservation. Clay always wanted to find his birth family, and I was running from the law, felony probation. I just couldn't seem to get it together and to complete it. I knew that one, this color was going to mess with me. Oh, it was a tough time living in our car in winter in a place that we didn't know. And one day somebody told us about some white people that served food Thursday nights at the Bethel Church. Thursday night came, we were cold, dirty, and hungry, so we checked it out, and that was the first Celebrate Recovery meeting we attended. We were greeted with hugs by Derek and Ginger, even though we were smelly and dirty. I will never forget the first song he played, Waymaker. I cried my eyes out, not the music I was used to hearing. We thought we were walking into a soup kitchen. But God knew what his plans were for us. He knew the whole time. 1 Corinthians 10:13. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted. He will also provide a way out. July 2022 was my rock bottom when I stabbed my husband in the hand. I don't remember much about that day other than his scream that snapped me out of my rage. I felt horrible, and we both decided that had to be the end of our using. About a week after that, my background check came back clean to start Celebration Place. My first response to Derek was, "Are you sure?" "What social security number did you use?" Only God can make this happen.
Yes.
2 Corinthians 5:17. When someone becomes a Christian, he becomes a brand new person inside. He is not the same anymore. A new life has begun. 5 years from our first CR meeting, we're now leaders in CR Shiprock and CR Chinle.
Yes.
In August, we'll be 2 years sober from drugs, and November, 4 years sober from alcohol. I've held down the same job for almost 2 years. I am the friend that I want to have, and I am reliable and can now be trusted. I'm working on repairing my relationships with my kids, just waiting for my youngest to be 18 so I can begin connecting with him. My relationship with God is stronger than ever. I can pray to him and he answers. Everything I've lost, he is restoring, and every day I can see the good in myself that he always knew existed. In April, I completed my first step study with 3 other amazing women. I'm looking to lead a step study here in the near future. Last June, we got the privilege of attending the summit for the first time, and it was a powerful and special experience. We'll be attending again next month. May 18th, Clay and I celebrated 8 years of marriage. Proverbs 29:25. It is dangerous to be concerned with what others think of you, but if you trust in the Lord, you are safe. I've learned how to love myself, and it feels good to be able to love and trust others. I've learned how to ignore the lies of the enemy and be the support to others when they think that there's no hope. If I can overcome these obstacles, anyone can. After 25 years of addiction and a lifetime of mental illness, I am free. My journey is beginning, and I can't wait to see all God's plans he has for me. Thank you for listening tonight.